Good afternoon, class. Today we're going to go over Chapter 8, and Chapter 8 entails sex offenses or sex offending in institutional settings. And there's a lot of information in this chapter. It goes over the different areas or institutional settings where sex abuse occurs, and there's a lot of stuff to read, so make sure you read this entire chapter. This PowerPoint is just informational for you, but we're going to go over a lot of the details in the chapter. First of all, the book talks about sexual abuse within schools. So there's been a lot of studies, but there hasn't been a lot of results from these studies due to the fact that there's different behaviors that go on, different sample sizes, and the studies have been done in different ways. So there's no real way to pinpoint what happens in schools as far as sexual abuse. We do know that those most likely to sexually abuse children are going to be teachers, coaches, music tutors are more likely to abuse children. There's other abuse that happens that's non-sexual, such as hazing. So there's a lot of research that goes into that. But again, there's a fine line between sexual abuse and hazing when it comes to schools. It does happen. It's pretty prevalent as far as female teachers, which we'll find out in a little bit about how female sex offenders become teachers or vice versa. In daycare settings, we know that there's sexual abuse. There's substantial abuse. A lot of it is not reported. Most of it is not reported, so the reported numbers are very low. Certain factors seem to play a key role, and those are low staff members in the child care area. The staff is younger than 25 years old and single. Daycare is very informal. It's not as formal as it should be. Is it licensed? A lot of daycare centers are unlicensed, and therefore they are not looked at with such scrutiny as a licensed daycare would be. As far as the Boy Scouts, there has been a huge amount of press and information about sex abuse in the Boy Scouts. In 1994, or actually in a study in 1994, there was a lot of information that came out that there was child sexual abuse in the Boy Scouts of America between 1971 and 1989. And a lot of plaintiffs came forward about their being abused, and many others came out, and it kind of rocked the Boy Scouts of America to its core. So they did a lot of things. A lot of things came out of that after being sued, and the plaintiffs won many millions of dollars. And again, what would happen was that the sex abuse that went on was known to the Boy Scouts, and yet the Scout leaders were allowed to continue to lead the Boy Scouts and would continue to abuse. So that was the big issue with the Boy Scouts. Again, more than 6,000 filers of abusers at Boy Scouts of America headquarters. So it was a huge issue that went on. During the camping trips or jamborees, that's when a lot of the abuse went on, during sleepovers or camping. As far as big brothers and big sisters, abuse has occurred due to hiring practices and lack of training and supervision. And again, it's occurred at the abuser's home or on camping trips. Big brothers and big sisters now include criminal backgrounds. They didn't always. They included some background checks, but now they do criminal background checks and a very strict screening process. So big brothers and big sisters, and again, in every institution, there's going to be sexual abusers. The majority of employees that work for these institutions do not do that, but there are some that do, unfortunately. As far as athletic organizations, you've probably heard the abuse, especially within the Olympics, of a certain couple doctors that abused the gymnasts. And again, the age group was that they were about 16 or younger than 16, and the victims were very reluctant to file out of fear of being blacklisted from their sport and being outed as a person that would say something outlandish that a very famous coach would ever do that. So a lot of fear to report. We're talking about Jerry Sandusky and Larry Nassar. If you want to do some research on them, they were prolific sexual abusers of athletes. As far as athletic organizations, there's those two doctors. And again, if you want to read about them, do some research. Book talks briefly about them, but they have been doing this for most of their careers to athletes. Non-Catholic religious organizations. And the book talks about all religious sects have sexual abuse within the clergy and young people. There's few numbers to report, so a lot of data is not available as far as non-Catholic organizations. But when it comes to Catholic organizations, there is a huge problem that happened a few years ago, and a study was done, and it shows that the extent of abuse within the Catholic Church was huge. And again, much like the Boy Scouts, once priests were found to be abusing usually young boys or young men, the abuse would continue because the Catholic diocese would not do anything about it. So again, these prolific priests who were sexually abusing boys, it was known, but nothing was done to stop them. So again, total allegations found were almost 5,000, and again, it represented only 4%, which is very small, but still, it occurred through many, many, many years, and most of the victims were males between 11 and 14. Continuing with this, the study was done, and it focused on the 70s and the 80s in the Catholic Church. And a lot of issues went into this because of psychological, developmental, organizational, cultural, and situational factors within the church. And again, they were allowed to continue to work even though the abuse was found. Sexual abuse within the prisons. There's a lot of good information in this chapter about that. Males and females can be sexually assaulted by both inmates and staff. And just to let you know, it is always illegal for a staff member to have sex with an inmate. No matter if the inmate complies, no matter if they're married, they're single, they're black, they're white, it doesn't matter. It's always illegal for a staff member to have sex with an inmate, period. So all you correctional officers that are out there that are going to be going into the Department of Corrections, remember that. I saw so many people walked out, arrested from the prisons that I worked at because they were having sex with inmates. And it's always illegal for the correctional staff, period. The prevalence of sex abuse within prisons is not well known because a lot of people do not want to talk about it. Snitching is viewed as something that is weak and will get you hurt. Primary causes of sexual abuse within prisons is very interesting. Overcrowding is one. Single-sex nature of prisons. You have a prison, it's all male. You have 4,000 in California. Some of these prisons have up to 2,000 or 3,000 people, 4,000 inmates. They're all one sex, all male. Inadequacy of legal solutions to prison rape. Continuing this, sex in prison is usually about power and control, and it's coerced. It's not consensual. And it is an assault. It's an illegal act. And then some studies, and in fact it's a low number, but found between 10 and 25% of inmates are raped or sexually coerced while incarcerated. Sexual coercion is more prevalent than completed rapes. Rape is common, with some inmates reporting up to 100 incidents of sexual assaults per year. So again, these are probably underreported, but that's a very large amount. Variation in prison stats of sexual assaults are the result of underreporting, the failure of authorities to identify a common definition of sexual assault, and the misrepresentation of coerced assault as being consensual. So there's some differentiation between what actually is a sexual assault. So there's many reasons for non-reporting this when it happens. A lot of fear, shame, fear of not being believed, and effective officials who won't do anything. So basically, you don't want to report something like that because it could get you hurt. People may not believe you. But there are things that are going to be done for the person. And first of all, we're talking about victimization, which is serious public health problems, talking about diseases such as HIV, AIDS, hepatitis C and B, and tuberculosis. So obviously, being victimized can result in those things. Increased institutional violence can occur. Some victims of rape turn to suicide. There's a large amount of suicide within our prison system because of this. And the high risk of lifelong trauma and psychological problems can occur due to that. And it can turn nonviolent offenders into those who have a high potential for violence. So some characteristics of sexual assaulters and victims, two different entities here. Victims can be, not always, physically weaker, younger, known to be homosexual, suffer from developmental or mental disorders, have substance abuse problems, are not gang affiliated, sexually assaulted previously, or ratted or snitched on someone. So that is a typology of a victim, but not always. They don't always have to have those typologies. More than 90% of rapes are interracial. Most victims are white. Most sexually assaulted inmates are black, per the book. And raping another inmate is to establish status. Again, it's about power and control. So those are some assaulters and victims here. The Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, which you can read about in the book, that is what is used nowadays to report and to assist in the prosecution of those that commit prison rape. And this was signed into law by President Bush in 2003. And prison rape is identified as PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, as coercive sexual acts. And you can read what this entails. So it's very specific, very specific. There's 5 main purposes of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which you should know, which the book talks about. Make sure you read that. Preventing sexual assault in prison. There's been a lot of studies, and these studies have shown that better screening and classification procedures, improved staff supervision, faster and more certain punishment, increased utilization of single cells, better training for inmates and staff, could possibly help decrease incidents of prison rape. So again, these things are brought to the prison system now with the Prison Rape Elimination Act for training of inmates and staff. As far as sexual abuse in the military, book talks about how women have increasingly reported being sexually assaulted while serving. Some report being raped or gang raped while serving. Some, this is probably an underreported incidence. Studies have shown that 1/3 of the abuse is not reported. It's probably more than that, unfortunately. PTSD, dissociative disorder, eating disorders, and self-harm are potential effects of sexual assault for females in the military as well as males. So as you can see, sexual assault in institutions, whether it's the Boy Scouts, the church, prison, the military, schools, it does happen, sometimes more frequently than is reported. So make sure you read this chapter and go over the questions at the end, the discussion questions. And if you have any more information you need from me, please email me or you can put it in the discussion tab. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.